Gwen Cole. I am the liaison nurse for Miles and St. Andrew's Home Health and Hospice, and this is our third screening in the state of Maine. This movie came to us when we were at a potluck supper for our home health agency, and we showed the movie to the entire staff, and they said you need to take it to the public. And that's just what we've done, and it's been very well received. It's a very powerful movie made by two men, Terry Caldeshaw and Michael Bernhagen. And this is their labor of love. They decided to make this movie. They're longtime friends, but both of them suffered tremendous loss. Michael lost his mother, and Terry lost his brother, and you'll see Terry in the movie. And there are also 4 other stories. But they decided, when they started talking, how difficult it was for them to navigate the healthcare system, and that there were options. And Michael was even a hospital administrator, and he had never heard about hospice. And he also did not have a conversation with his mother about what her wishes were at the end of her life. So he decided that he needed to do this movie so that people would have a chance to have conversations with their families. So I do hope you enjoy this movie. I think it really is wonderful, and it really can start a nationwide dialogue. I would like to introduce Rob Hunold, who is our medical director, and he is going to be part of the panel. And like I said, if we could all move forward at the end, that would be terrific. I do want to thank Megan Williams from Penn Bay, and she and Monica Chow have been instrumental in helping with putting this movie together tonight. So thank you very much. Rob?
Do we have control over that music from? It's not setting the mood. No. Okay, we'll give it a try anyway. Thanks for coming. My name is Dr. Rob Hunold. I'm a family medicine physician at Miles, and I live in Noblesboro, and I'm also the hospice medical director for Miles Home Health and Hospice. I'm going to tell a quick story about how I got involved in end-of-life planning, and then we'll get the movie started. Early on in my medical training, I was a young resident in Arizona, and I had a patient who was living in a nursing home. She was 93 years old, and I asked her to go see a local general surgeon to have a wound evaluated on her foot. She went and saw the surgeon. He felt that she needed to be admitted to the hospital, so she came into the hospital under his attending and under his orders. And so therefore, none of her paperwork that was present at the nursing home ever got transferred to the hospital. And we had had conversations about end-of-life planning, and none of those conversations and none of the orders got transferred to the hospital as well. It just so happens that that night she did go into cardiac arrest. They resuscitated her and transferred her to the ICU, and she was put on a ventilator, and she didn't make any spontaneous breaths, but now she was under the assistance of a ventilator. I got a call the next morning because one of the nurses recognized my name on some of her paperwork from the nursing home, and the nurse called me at my house and said, would you mind coming in and seeing the patient? And by the way, her daughter is in the room, and her daughter is not happy how this all happened. So I walk into the ICU room. The daughter, my patient was about 93, the daughter was in her early 70s, was in a wheelchair. And I walk in the room, I identified myself, saying, my name is Dr. Rob Hunold, I'm your mother's physician, and I want to apologize how we got here. As you know, this was not her wishes to come into the hospital in the first place. It wasn't her wishes to be resuscitated, and certainly wasn't her wishes to be on a ventilator. So I said, if you would like, we can disconnect the ventilator now, and we could just let her pass. And I moved towards the patient, and the patient's daughter says to me, just wait 1 second, Sonny. Let me teach you something right now. She says, I'm her power of attorney, and while she's alive, I can go to the bank and take out the money, and if she dies, then I can't do that, and then we'll have to be shared amongst all of our siblings. So I'm going to go to the bank and get the money, and I'll give you a call when I'm done. So at this point, I thought maybe this was some sort of resident training film, like this was being filmed by my director and to see how I would respond. But it wasn't a film. She left the room. She called back about 10 o'clock that morning and called from the bank and said, you can go ahead and disconnect the machine, and you know, we're all set. And I said, well, we'll wait for you to come back. And she goes, no, you just go ahead and do what you need to do. So at this point, I broke down and I said, I just got curious on you know, how much money are we talking about here? And she says, $1,500. So we went into the room, disconnected the machine. The nurse and I just sat there next to her, and she passed away and didn't take any spontaneous breaths. And although I think I'm a much better physician now and made some mistakes at that point in that end of life, what kept circling in my brain was, how does a 93-year-old woman end up in an ICU bed at Scottsdale, Arizona Hospital by herself? How does that happen in modern day medicine and in modern day society? And so I vowed never to be part of a death like that again. I found out about something called hospice, and that started the wheels turning towards here. And so I tell you the story because that's how I got involved in end-of-life planning. And so here tonight, you'll get a chance to watch a movie that some people have allowed you to be part of their journey. And I would invite you tonight to go there, to go to that level of thinking, to go to your end of your life. What would you like it to be like? What planning do you need to do to make sure that that happens? And enjoy the moment to be able to go to, I think, a different level of thinking than we spend on our day-to-day basis. If during that time you think of some questions that you may need answered, you think of some obstacles that are preventing you from implementing that plan, we do have some experts tonight to answer those questions. I'm going to have them stand up. Reverend Stephen White is the chaplain for Kno-Wal-Lin Hospice. Next to him is Heidi McCaffrey, licensed clinical social worker and hospice coordinator for Kno-Wal-Lin. Down the hall is Mike Hall, board member of Kno-Wal-Lin Hospice, Home Health and Hospice, and also owner of Hall Funeral Home. And then Holly Miller, who is a registered nurse and our hospice coordinator for Miles and St. Andrews. So each one of their fields, whether it be a reverend, a licensed clinical social worker, a nurse, a funeral home director, or a physician, certainly could address any questions that may come up during the movie. So enjoy the opportunity and enjoy the movie. So I just wanted to point out that there are forms that you can strike up a conversation with your family, and then bring that into your primary care provider and have that permanently put into your record so that physicians, and I know they have access to it at Miles and in Penn Bay, have access to the electronic medical record that form will be present in. That's what I wanted to mention.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Mike Hall. I'm owner of the Hall Funeral Homes in Waldoboro, Thomaston, and Booth Bay. And first let me start with my dad. My dad died 10 years ago, and one of my dad's wishes was to die at home. And we wanted to keep that promise to him, and we were able to do that. And I thank hospice for being there for us as a family. It provided for our family, who I'm the youngest of four. We weren't as close because we were separated by age. But because of the experience we had at my dad's home, it brought my sisters and myself together to have time with our father, but also to build our bonds as a family stronger together. So hospice, even though in my profession I help other family members with the loss of their loved one, this was about my father and our father, and I can just say that our hospice experience was a very positive experience. We knew Dad was going to die, but it was a comfort to know that he was where he wanted to be in his farm, and that we were surrounded by my sisters and my daughter, Emma, and my wife, and it was just such a good feeling to be there. And my dad ended up dying 3 days before Christmas, and we had his services after Christmas. But I will never forget that Christmas morning. We all came out and had coffee and breakfast, and but we all were weeping, you know. But it wasn't necessarily weeping and crying because of our loss. It was really joy, because it was a gift in a sense, because our dad's death brought us all together as a family. We hadn't been together as a family for Christmas in 30 years. So through Dad's death, we built a new, stronger relationship as a family. And so with that, I encourage you, if you have questions about hospice and you're not sure about it, my testimony tonight hopefully will help you at least make that first step to to talk and with your family and talk to the caregivers here about hospice. And part of my process here is to help educate you not only before death, but also anticipating death. We have to plan on what we want to do to honor our loved ones. And it's always a tough conversation. Sometimes the parents want to talk about it, but the children do not, or vice versa. But what I find is the families who do have the conversation and talk about their wishes and their needs as survivors are much better off. It gives them a direction, a path to basically start their grieving process, and gives them traction so that they can start moving forward in a positive way towards healing. And that's the essence of it. Life is precious. Through my journey as a funeral director, I see that each and every day, and it really makes you realize all the things we worry about in life really doesn't really mean a whole lot. It really comes down to your family and your friendships and time together. So I encourage you, if you aren't as close to your family, that you try to bring them closer together, because when you do get close to death, you're going to be forced to come together anyway, and it's much better to be able to have a conversation and listen to your needs as the person who may be ill, but also listen to your children and your family and what their needs are going to be through this process. So with that, I'm going to pass it on here to our next panel. Yes.
Hi, I'm Holly Miller, Hospice and Palliative Coordinator for Miles and St. Andrews. And I wanted to talk more about the conversation. Dr. Hunold mentioned having forms, advanced directives. And I see these pieces of paper as a tool to have a conversation, and how it's really important for people to let people around them, their loved ones, know what their wishes and desires are. Like everybody, anybody who's over 18 years old should have an advance directive that just basically names, somebody to be their legal or healthcare power of attorney in the event that they couldn't speak for themselves. Somebody who's young and healthy, maybe they're in a car accident or in a coma or something. Who is it that they know in their life and trust that would make decisions, in their best interest with what they know about this person. And then, if somebody is really chronically ill and, are considered to be maybe in their last year of life, then it's time to really have a more in-depth conversation about, would you want a feeding tube? Would you want antibiotics? Would you want IV antibiotics? Would you want to be resuscitated? And not just, if your heart stops, would you want that to be restarted? Well, anybody would say, of course, why not? But when you can have that conversation about that, if you're 80 years old and you get COPD and CHF and diabetes, and your heart stops, the chances are that no matter what facility you're in, or the best care, they're not going to be able to revive you. And if they do, you probably will not be back to your baseline. And as you heard in the movie, the cracking ribs. It's really awful. So it's those kind of people really need to be informed, and so that was that part. And then I like to think of hospice and palliative care both as having a team of people who come alongside of you and your family and navigate you through different processes, because people don't know how to die. That's not, like he was saying, it's not like I can go talk to somebody down the street and say, hey, you went through this dying process. What was it like for you? Because guess what? They're not here to talk with us. But that's why it's just really important to have this, a hospice or palliative team. And when, like Dr. Hunold said, Medicare, and most insurances will pay 100% for hospice care in the home, so there's no charge. And I get that question so often. People will say, well, how much does it cost? Or, well, I can't afford hospice. If you've got insurance, you can, because there's no charge. But that hospice team consists of a chaplain, social worker, RN, physician, volunteers, nurse's aide to come in and help with bathing. And they all address so many different levels, you know, your physical, psychological, spiritual, emotional needs, and everybody brings a different aspect. You know, like there may be a person who's just is in denial, does not want to talk at all about where they're going. You know, the nurse has been in, the doctor's been in, everybody's been in, and then one day the chaplain comes in, and all of a sudden that, you know, that having that person there at that time with a little different approach, that they're able to open up. It's why it's so important to have, you know, so many experts in disciplines. Thanks.
Hi. Hi. My name is Heidi McCaffrey. I'm the Director of Hospice and Palliative Care at Kno-Wal-Lin. Oh, can you hear? My name is Heidi McCaffrey. I'm the Director of Hospice and Palliative Care at Kno-Wal-Lin, and I am a social worker. What I wanted to talk about just briefly is something that we hear all the time. If we have a patient that is in the eligibility for hospice, which is the last 6 months of life, we think, we hear all the time, I'm just not ready for that, or it's not time for that. And it's really, really important for people to get on hospice as soon as possible, because the benefits really, the longer you're on, the benefits, you know, multiply. Having that time to form relationships with your nurse, having the time to get used to the, you know, the home health aides that's doing care for you, having the time to meet the social worker and really talk about the issues that you're going through, you know, maybe relationships you need to mend, or maybe a lot of time it's, you know, finances. I'm really worried about how my wife's gonna get by financially when I'm not here. Those things take a lot of time to work out. And what we do a lot of is we work with Make-A-Wish and foundations like that to really try to give people, you know, what is the one thing you still wanna do, or what is the one thing that would really, really bring joy to your life or your family's life. Recently we had a gentleman that had kind of taken on 2 children in his area that, and tried to kind of give them a better quality of life. And they came over and they did homework with him, and his wife were really kind of fostering them along. And his one wish was that he could take him to Great Animal Park. And he didn't have the money to do it. He wasn't feeling good. And once hospice got involved, we got him, you know, the right medication, so he had a little bit more energy. He didn't have a lot of pain. He could do that. And we got gifts and grants, and it actually came out that he went to the animal park, and a hotel nearby gave an overnight with a meal, and it was just something that was so important to him and the children. But without that time to put it together, you know, it never would have come together. So it's really, you know, we hear all the time as patients die, the family would say, oh, I wish we had got on hospice earlier. And I don't think in all my years, and you guys too, you know, talk about it, have you ever heard someone say, oh, I was on hospice too early? I don't think anyone has ever said that. So I just encourage people really to make the most of it, and to encourage their family and friends really to look into it and ask those questions. Is it, you know, is it a good time? And to really get on those programs as soon as possible. Thank you.
I'm Stephen White, and I'm the hospice chaplain for Kno-Wal-Lin. I don't want to spend a lot of time, because this is really your time to talk back to us or to provide the rest of the group here with thoughts and reflections. But I just want to note that it's easy these days to criticize government and insurance and that whole industry, and yet they did something, I think, quite remarkable a few years ago when they made the hospice benefit available to everybody who has insurance. And the other thing that they did, which I keep having to remind myself is one of those little miracles in my life, is that they also said that in addition to a medical director and a social worker and a nurse and various therapists along the line, that they would also provide the opportunity to speak to somebody, a chaplain. And I've been privileged to be in this position for about 1.5 years with Kno-Wal-Lin. And I come in and say to my new hospice patients, my first visit with them, I'm here not as a clergy person, although I happen to be one, not in any sectarian way, although I have been involved in church work for a lot of years. I'm here really as a friend, and I'm here to be a companion with you on this particular part of your journey. And I have a feeling that there is an expectation that the people who come in with hospice are going to give pills and take temperatures and try to help them work on their various symptoms. And yet my job, and in a sense everybody else's job who's involved in hospice, is there to be a companion, to be a friend, to follow along with you, as Holly said, as you make your way down this particular path. And that's really what our job is. Some of us have little expertise in this area or that, but essentially we're here to be your companion. And it's a real privilege to be a part of that.
Okay, we'll take any questions.
I have a microphone here, so if you raise your hand, I'll bring it to you so that you can ask your question. We have a thorough panel. I think they've answered some of those. Yes.
Hi, I used to work for hospice many years ago in Chicago, and my children at that time were in elementary school and middle school. There wasn't a lot I could explain about my job and so forth that they could relate to at that time. They just gave us the best gift. They're now 28 and 32. And they surprised us for our anniversary. And my son flew in, and the four of us spent 4 days together. And we did what we always did in our home, talk about anything we wanted to. And we talked about babies to wills. And it was so wonderful because we finally said, we've just filled out new wills and we need to ask you to do something rather seriously. Either one of you want to be the power of attorney or the health proxy, to take care of that. And one said, I can't do that part. My brother's better at that because he's a firefighter. And he can actually, consider those things that are needed. But I would like to be your power of attorney because I'm really good at carrying things, making sure they're done and finished and carried through. So that was decided. And my son, in his response to being responsible for our health care at the end of our lives, if need be, said, Mom, I don't have a problem with that because I feel my feelings and my respect for your wishes are two separate things. And he said, I think I can separate those two things. And I think he can. And my daughter said, I don't think I can. So that was really good to cover with them. And then we realized, wait, we have wills, but they don't. One's married and one is not. And so we discussed what we wanted after life, after we died, how we wanted everything carried out for each individual person. And I have to tell you again, the other gift of that was my husband would never have that discussion, even between the two of us. But when it was the four of us, and the children were brave enough to say what they wanted, he was able to say it. And so now we all know what each person wants, even at the time when we go to a funeral parlor or we don't. We know that. But I would really, really, really highly encourage people to have those conversations at any age, because it certainly made all of us feel much more assured with, those wishes and that they could be carried out. So I want to thank you because I have the wills, but I don't have the paperwork for the health part of it. And that's something we need to take care of right now. Thank you all. This was a really good film.
I do think it's important to realize that you can't identify anybody as your power of attorney. There are some laws that define it if it comes down to that, and sometimes it does in a hospital setting. We have to resort to the law, and for instance, the first one is the spouse, the next person would be the oldest child. But that's never a position we want to be in, and you can identify anybody you would like to be in that position. It's a very, and at the same point, if you are identified as a power of attorney, it's a pretty serious responsibility that you have to be ready to make some tough choices on behalf of the person who identified you.
Could you describe a little bit and compare and contrast for the audience the difference between palliative care and hospice care? Because that's a question I know we get a lot.
Basically, it's a very confusing gray area. Palliative care is for people who maybe they're not ready for hospice. You know, maybe everybody but them realizes that they are in their last 6 months of life, but they're not ready for that. So at our agency anyways, the hospice nurse goes in and starts case managing that person rather than having a skilled nurse. And that way we're starting to introduce certain disciplines in. Maybe we'll offer a volunteer or a chaplain, and just start, again, having people in there that they might start becoming more comfortable having the conversation, and might, eventually end up, deciding on hospice. But then some people never will. They die with never acknowledging that they're dying, and so they'll stay in palliative care. But we try to give them as much as support as we can. And then the other case is if somebody has cancer and they realize they're dying, they've got the prognosis, but they're still receiving chemotherapy or radiation, to help with pain or something. So many times they're in the palliative care program. So because if they move to hospice, then the hospice agency has to absorb the cost of all of those medications, and chemo meds are really expensive. So those are the two basic scenarios.
Just one of the other Medicare differences is being homebound is a Medicare regulation for people that are under the palliative care program. So they have to basically not be able to get out except for things like a doctor's appointment or going to church. But basically they have to, we have to document that they can't leave their home. So sometimes it is beneficial. It will kind of push people along that are eligible for hospice to move into the hospice program so they can be out and about and do all the things they really want to do.
We might just get to the basics. Palliative means comfort care. We're not trying to cure somebody, but it is that for that person, I think you have said, who's not quite ready to say, I'm ready for hospice. They're getting very close to it. It's the step just before that, and it implies that they are receiving whatever is necessary to be comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that is easily clarified with just that point too, is that life-sustaining treatment. When you're in hospice, you're not seeking a cure. When you're in palliative care, you still may be seeking a cure. So typically people in palliative care also are still receiving treatments.
I'd like to ask a question that may be a little more taboo. And that is how hospice treats patients who want to end their lives, are ready to die, and would like help in that.
It's interesting. We've done this movie now 3 times. This is the second time. The first time we showed it, that was the first question, and the gentleman said, "Will you help me die?" And the first board member answered it, "Well, we can facilitate." And then I realized that we misinterpreted what he had said. He was asking that question. And it's certainly not taboo, although in the state of Maine, that's not a legal process, and you have to travel to Oregon or Washington to participate in that pipeline that's been set up there. Those of us who prescribe medications that can result in someone's death, we prescribe them not with that intention. We prescribe them with the intention of comfort. And the law that protects us from doing that is called the double effect. And the double effect says my intention was to prescribe the medications like morphine or pain medication or Ativan or sedating medications with the intention of relieving comfort. We don't discuss with people the option of taking that medication to end life, because that's not in our mission. It's not in our mindset, I guess you would say. Our mindset is to provide comfort till the last day of their life. Certainly it is an interesting society question, and I'm not quite sure where we're headed. I think we probably are more headed in that direction of allowing that option, but currently not allowed in the state of Maine. You look like you wanted to follow it up with.
Yes, I mean, I think to me, it's the question coming on to in society. And I've had my father-in-law, my father died this year. Both wished that they could have ended their lives, were ready to die. And so how do you in hospice counsel somebody who says, you know, I'm ready to die? What can you do for me?
I'm going to pass it down to the Reverend. I would say, by the way, that we have had people ask us that, and we followed up with the question, we often follow up with the questions of why. Why are you asking that question? What's pushing you to consider doing that? I've recently had a patient who stated over and over again that she would like to kill herself, and we pursued that question more thoroughly. What was going on in her life? Why were you thinking that way? What is making you think this way? Is it pain? Are you missing something? And I personally will go down that road versus facilitating.
Well, that certainly is part of the conversation, and it's been a part of the conversation I've had with any number of my patients. One of the things that I try to talk about when we get to that place is about the fears they might have of dying versus remaining alive. We also talk about, are there some things that you can look forward to even at the very end of your life that will be life sustaining for you? Are there some things that are still worth it in your life that might allow you to have a more positive approach to these last days or weeks in your living? I think that people at that point are beginning to prepare to die, and with the kind of support that I hope that they're getting from family, friends, and from the medical profession and from hospice, they are going to be allowed to move in a natural way towards their final moment. Whether they can push it, make it happen sooner or not, is perhaps getting into a legal area that isn't available to them. But there are other things that we can do. Talking about it, being very open about it, I think can be helpful.
We've actually had two cases like that. One, a gentleman, I believe he had cancer. It was quite a few years ago. He was decided he was ready for hospice, and when the hospice nurse showed up, he said, "I'm ready," and she said, "What?" Like he just was so, "I'm ready," and he thought she was there to give him the dose, and he was disappointed at first, but then he lived for a few months and had a good quality of life because, again, the different disciplines came in and the support and addressed a lot of those issues why he was ready to just end it then. And then we had another person, a lady that was suicidal when we, and she lived alone when we accepted her into hospice. And one of the things was we addressed the depression, and we had every discipline was in. She accepted the volunteer, the chaplain, and everybody. And again, all levels, emotional, physical, spiritual, all of those issues were being addressed. And in no time, she no longer cared to die. It was funny. We thought we might actually have to discharge her from hospice, which we do sometimes when people they get such good care in their home that suddenly they're not really dying anymore. You look at over a few months, they're gaining weight, they're able to do more, and they're no longer terminal, and that happens. And we thought that might happen with her, but she did actually die soon afterward. But yeah, it's an interesting question.
We have a question.
Well, I just really wanted to say that my mother was not terminally ill, but when she left the hospital after surgery, she was told she probably had 2 weeks. She lived another year, but she had hospice nurses coming by. She didn't want hospice volunteers. She only weighed about 65 pounds, and she was so weak, she really knew she had to have round-the-clock care for the rest of her life. And it was eating up her finances, and she wanted to leave something to her children. my sisters and me, and she decided to stop eating. And so she did take her own life in a sense. But when she made that decision, when she called me to tell me, her caregiver was really upset, and she sounded stronger than I had heard her over the last year, because she had taken control, and she had, all those months, had no privacy, no mobility really, no freedom like she had right up until the surgery. So she was very, very excited to have finally taken control, and in 9 days she was gone. And the other thing I wanted to say was that being a Yankee, very independent, I don't want anyone to be burdened by me in my last days. And I mentioned that to one of my sons, and he was quite surprised and said, "You mean you don't think we would want the privilege to take care of you in the latter part of your life?" And I never thought of it that way. I just thought it's going to be a terrible burden if I don't cope with me. So, thank you.
We have time for just one or two more questions.
I'm a retired social worker, but one of my jobs was oncology social work at Penn Bay. And I remember a specific patient that I worked with there. And it was somebody who had made a decision to die, who was terminal. And he didn't want to tell me what he was going to do when he left the hospital. And we had long talks, and a chaplain came in and spoke to him. And it was very clear to me that he was, and he had a family, and he told the family about it, that he was at peace with it, that was his decision that brought him peace. And I remember wanting to argue with him and try to persuade him otherwise, and then I really got that I needed to respect his decision, and that he really was at peace about it. So that was a real life lesson for me, and I think it was important that he got to choose what to do. So.
I just say a couple of things. So many of these comments have indicated how important having the conversation is. That it changes people when you talk. And I couldn't help but notice that one of the people interviewed had a website. I wrote it down. It's something like talkearlytalkoften.com. I'm going to have to go to that site because it sounds fascinating. But it's all about being willing to take that risk and have that conversation with the person. Even if death is not anywhere near by. Those of us who are over 30 probably need to start thinking about these things. And then when you're over 60 and still feeling hale and hearty, it's good to update that conversation with your loved ones. So I think it's very important to keep the term conversation in mind, and that's of course what this movie is all about. The other thing I would say is we talk a lot about people dying in their homes, and it's obviously what just about everybody who gets interviewed in this film indicates at the beginning. They want to die at home. We also, however, know that not every home is an appropriate place for a person to die in. And we're happy to announce that just last Sunday, we had the very first steps taken in the creation of the new hospice house. The groundbreaking took place, and a hospice house is now under construction. And that will provide a place, a home-like atmosphere for people in hospice to go and spend their final days or months or weeks. And this is a very exciting thing for this area. to have a new hospice house available, the only one north of the Auburn, Scarborough area. And we're excited about what that's going to mean for the availability of hospice care for people in all sorts of circumstances. Sometimes the home is not available, not appropriate. This can be that way.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you all for coming, and I would like to say one last comment. You have two amazing organizations depending on where you live. I'm very proud of Miles Home Health and Hospice down in Damascotta, Boothbay Harbor, Waldoboro, and then here at Penn Bay. You have some really amazing organizations full of people who want to give good, compassionate care. Keep them in mind, call them, ask questions. Referrals to home health and hospice can come from anybody, so don't be afraid to speak up. Thank you very much for coming.